What's going on? Welcome back to another mailbag. Subscribe to the channel for more Trailblazer related videos, and stay tuned as on draft night we will have a NBA draft live stream covering every single pick in the draft and giving our reaction. You don't want to miss that, so hit that subscribe button. Also hit that like button. It helps us out. I greatly appreciate you doing that. And with that being said, let's jump into things. Chase McGraw says, pick 23 is looking more and more like it could lead to us getting an instant contributor. Who are your top 5 guys you want us to draft with that pick? Well, 2 of the top guys that I wanted a couple months ago with that pick were Leonard Miller and Derek Lively II, and it looks like both those guys have ridden up boards to the point where they won't be available at that pick. So now there's a bunch of different guys that the Blazers could potentially go for, and I think the top guys depend on what the rest of their offseason looks like. I will have a mock draft soon, but I did drop a prospect watch video for that pick. You can go back and check that out. I dropped it like 3 weeks ago. There are a couple of players that I would like. Colby Jones could be interesting. Andre Jackson Jr. is slated as a second-round guy, but I have a first-round grade on him. Basically, I want somebody athletic that can defend and has some sort of offensive skill upside, whether that's shooting upside or playmaking upside or whatever. So that's where Andre Jackson Jr. fits in. Olivier Maxence Prosper could fit into that sort of mold as well. He's been rising up boards, so there's some new intriguing names to look at with that pick. Alex Colfer asked for a video breaking down the new CBA, and we will have something like that at some point. We have to get a full grasp of everything new in the CBA before we jump into whatever is new, but we will have you guys covered regarding that. Thank you, Alex. Shout out to Rahi, who says, seems like there's a higher chance of us keeping the pick than we previously thought. If we were to trade down but not completely out of the draft, what is your current ideal trade down scenario? How would it change if Scoot's at 3 versus Miller at 3? I think Miller at 3 makes it less likely for them to trade down, but I don't think the Blazers are trading down regardless. The ideal trade down scenario would probably be one of the trade downs that I included in my third pick trade video. Just any trade where the Blazers get a player that helps them win now and also gets a draft pick where they can draft somebody I'm high on is probably the ideal trade down scenario. However, I'm still just not really a fan of trading down the third pick for other draft picks. It just seems like the Blazers would be watering down assets instead of getting something truly special, either via trade by trading the third pick for somebody legitimate or by drafting somebody there. Davis Johnson says, what? Davis, this is Blazers Uprise, not Locked On Blazers. Yeah. Aiden Mount says, after seeing everything from the Scoot Henderson workout, in your opinion, what are the chances that we see the Trailblazers make a pick in the draft? Scoot Henderson's workout showed me nothing. Like, we've watched him play for 2 years. A workout probably shouldn't change anyone's opinions. It's not like his game isn't already well known. So the workout, I know a lot of Blazer fans got hyped at it, but it's just kind of whatever. I mean, it's cool to see him in a Blazer uniform, I guess, even though it's a practice jersey, but I think it's about a 50-50 chance that the Blazers end up keeping the third pick. MT says, I know you guys are out on Siakam for fit reasons, but hypothetically, would you do number 3 plus Nurkic plus Keon/Little for him? So in the scenario, we keep Simons for a future move. The Blazers, I think, would have to give up a little bit more than Nurkic plus Little. I'm not entirely sure. I think you'd have to do, yeah, Keon and Little and Nurkic and maybe Knox as well. If you're not trading Simons out, the Siakam doesn't get us to contention. Trading the third pick for him is very, very iffy. I'm not a fan of that. I would rather flip Siakam to a team that maybe would trade something else up. Maybe that's the one way the Blazers could get Jalen Brown from the Celtics, by sending Siakam there and keeping Anthony Simons. But here's the thing with Toronto, guys. When we talk about Siakam and Anunoby, just assume that it's going to be a trade where the Blazers get fleeced. Like, I can sit here and speculate as to if it could make sense or what the Blazers could do if the Raptors were willing to trade Siakam for number 3 and a package like that, but it's Masai Ujiri. He's not. He's very, very stingy. Supposedly, to even talk about Siakam, Ujiri needs the starting point to be the third pick, Anthony Simons, and Shaedon Sharpe. That's the level of ridiculous that we're talking about here. So, you know, hypothetically, I mean, maybe you could make something work. I would try and flip Siakam in that scenario, but it's just a hypothetical because Masai Ujiri is so extremely stingy, man. It kind of sucks for the Blazers, but we'll see how he handles this offseason for the Raptors. Shout out Sam Dooley, says, I'd love to get your take on the John Morant situation. Do you have insider knowledge on what his suspension might be? What's the long-term consequences to his brand? What's the potential impact on his play when he comes back? I don't have any knowledge, but it has been reported that it might be a 30-game suspension. Me and Eric talked about the John Morant situation 2 episodes ago on Blazers Uprise Live, our second channel. We stream Mondays and Thursdays. We talked about it on last Thursday's episode. We talked about our opinions on it and what should come of it and that sort of thing. So if you want our takes on that, check out that channel and check out that episode of Blazers Uprise Live. Shout out Zachary Bren, who says, do you think Dame and Scoot could play together? If so, what would we do with Ant and Sharp? It just seems like so many guards. And I just dropped a video on that. Scoot and Dame talking about building the team and that sort of thing. I know a lot of people were asking questions about that, so I made a video for it. I think you would have to shop Ant in that scenario, but you could keep him, I guess, and run Sharp as the backup 3 or the starting 3 and have a 3-guard lineup with Dame, Ant, and Scoot. However, defensively, that's just going to be an absolute disaster. So Dame and Scoot might be able to play together. It's going to be bad defensively, most likely, and Scoot's undersized for the shooting guard position. I don't even know who you'd consider the shooting guard in that scenario because Scoot's pretty much just looked at as a point guard. You'd be running 2 point guards out there, so you need a good defensive front court, and how the Blazers would put that together has been the question for a long time now. Lot Go Crazy says, how long do you think the Blazers can keep Dame happy without a star if we weren't able to acquire one? I don't know. I don't think there's a timeline on this. I think there's a bunch of communication that goes into how Dame feels about not only the team, but the front office as well. And I don't think it's a situation where, oh, if it doesn't happen this summer, he's automatically going to want out. But I don't think it's a situation where if it doesn't happen this summer that he doesn't want out. I think it's just kind of up in the air, so it's hard to put a timeline on it. Shout out Sam Stone, says, do you think Terry Stotts is a good fit on the Bucks coaching staff? I mean, some people like him as an assistant. I was never a fan of him as a coach, and I think the game kind of passed him by. He always did well when he had a big man that could post up and shoot turnaround, fadeaway, mid-range jumpers. Of course, he won a ring as an assistant coach with the Dallas Mavericks in 2011. He was kind of the offensive mastermind or whatever, and obviously that was Dirk. And then afterwards, LaMarcus Aldridge, he had some, solid offenses around him. And then once LaMarcus left, I felt like his offenses just got extremely stagnant. The stats back that up and were really easy to guard in the playoffs, and he didn't adjust well. So he might be fine as an assistant. I just think that, as the game's gone more towards ball movement, player movement, and three-point shooting. I mean, his team shoot threes, but his offenses were extremely stagnant, and defensively all he did was run drop scheme, and that's what Budenholzer was doing in Milwaukee for the longest time. So I don't really know if it has much of an impact. Shout out to Alex Colfer, who says, give me the list of players you put in a tier with Anthony Simons. Is he in the DAngelo Russell tier or the Jamal Murray tier? I think Jamal Murray is better than him. I think that Anthony Simons is better than DAngelo Russell. I think he's in a tier between those guys. Shout out to Ivan Ranich, who says, if we were to keep the 3rd overall pick and draft Miller or Amen, what players could we target with Ant and our other first-round pick? I am assuming we start Sharp and Dame next year. Thank you, and cheers from a Swiss fan. So I'm not sure if there's really a target that makes a ton of sense for Simons plus 23, because I don't think there's a player that's a little bit better than him in a front court spot that a team would be willing to trade for that package. And that's really what you'd be looking for in an Anthony Simons plus 23 trade. If the 23rd pick got traded, I think it would be more likely it goes to Chicago for the 2024 first that Portland owes Chicago, and that would come back to Portland, and then Portland would have all their future firsts, and then they would attach multiple future firsts to Anthony Simons for something. But it sounds like the Nets don't want to trade Mikhail. I already talked about Masai Ujiri. He's going to be stingy with not only Siakam, but OG Anunoby as well. So it's really hard to conceptualize a target for Anthony Simons and the 23rd pick, or even Anthony Simons and future firsts, and that's really where the difficulties come in. I mean, Ant straight up for OG could make some sense if the Blazers end up with Scoot at 3, but otherwise I think you're more looking at keeping Ant, Sharp's your third guard, Miller or Amen is your backup 3, and then you trade for like a Dorian Finney-Smith to be the starting 3, which isn't super flashy or anything, but he's a solid role player. I think you'd be looking at players more in that tier. Maybe the Blazers would try and sign a Bruce Brown for the full mid-level exception, since Denver can only pay him about $7 million unless they clear up a lot of salary, which I don't think is likely for them to do. So there could be some free agent targets that actually make sense, and the Blazers keep Ant. It's just going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, because there's so many different pathways, and those branch into other pathways, and I can't even make a prediction at this point. Shout out Anthony Simmons, who asks, is it likely that the pick is traded on or before draft night if it does get traded? I've heard whispers that it'll be draft night, but I have no idea. I don't know. It could be the day before the draft. That's when the Jeremy Grant trade happened, and we knew that was coming like months in advance. So if it does happen, I would expect it like a day or two before the draft up to draft night. It could happen draft day. It depends. It also depends on who's available at 3. So a hypothetical trade might be dependent upon Charlotte taking a certain someone at 2. So it might happen with the Blazers on the clock. I have no idea of the timeline of anything, let alone what could happen. Y Zebra says, Billups used a 2-3 zone early this season to solid effect. The Heat have used a similar defense frequently as well. What are the key differences between the two, as our defense cratered quickly, and while Miami has had a very rough defensive stretch post-All-Star break, they are far better overall? Is it coaching or personnel? I think it's both, because when you have Bam Adebayo around the rim who can cover a lot of ground quickly, then it makes it easier to run a zone, because bigs in the NBA have to be able to step out of the paint, step back into the paint because of defensive 3 seconds, which isn't a rule in college or any other level of basketball. Bam is one of the best defensive centers in the league, so having him anchoring that in the middle helps as well. I think the Heat do a really good job of gang rebounding, and that's kind of in their DNA. They're a team that plays with a chip on their shoulder and plays hard, plays physical, so they don't have problems on the boards like the Blazers had running a zone. And then also Miami has more length, so they can put length at the top of the zone to kind of disrupt guards a little bit while maintaining length down at the bottom of the zone. The problem is Chauncey Billups made the mistake of putting guards as the bottom corners of the 2-3 zone. So if the big man had to contest a drive, next in line to try and rebound around the rim was a guard, and it just was an absolute mess. Jeremy Grant was put at the top of the zone to try and disrupt passes with his length, but he's better as a secondary rim protector, helping out around the rim. So I just think Chauncey set up the zone in the wrong way almost all season long, and the Blazers just did not consistently play with the level of effort needed to play a zone, because you have to be able to fill in the gaps, rotate to other players, and then sprint to areas to box guys out, because that's a difficult thing with running a zone is you're not matched up against a guy. It's not as simple as just turning straight into him and boxing him out. Normally, you're going to be further away from offensive players, so boxing out is more difficult and takes more effort. So there's a lot of little things that go into running a zone well, especially at the NBA level, and that's why it's so hard. That's why you don't see a lot of teams doing it. I only like it as a change of pace option, but Miami has been the team that's ran zone the best. If other teams could replicate that, they probably would as a wrinkle to throw offenses off balance, but it's really just kind of a Miami thing. Eli Hanna says, what do you think about if Charlotte would trade LaMelo Ball for Sharp to sell a Scoot Sharp backcourt, and Brooklyn would do Ant +3 for Bridges? Dame, LaMelo Ball, Mikhail Bridges, Jeremy Grant, and Yusuf Nurkic. I don't know why the Blazers would want LaMelo Ball. In that situation, why wouldn't the Blazers just flip LaMelo Ball to Brooklyn instead of Ant? Because I don't think Brooklyn would be lower on Ball than Ant, but I think Ant makes more sense for the Blazers in that regard because he is a better off-ball player. I just don't really see going for it with Ball, especially when you don't even know if he can stay healthy, because Lonzo's had serious injury issues. His NBA future is in doubt, and then LaMelo has had some injury issues as well. So I'm not a fan of trading for Ball in that scenario. If you can get Mikhail, then okay, sure, but yeah, I'm just not a fan of that. Especially trading Sharp as well. I don't like it. I just don't like it. South Bend Shovel Slayer says, what does your Blazers dream draft / free agency look like? My dream draft would be probably trading Ant in 3 for Jalen Brown, and then in free agency getting Bruce Brown and having Sharp come off the bench still, so there's not too much pressure on him. And then you got starting lineup of Lillard, Bruce Brown, Jalen Brown, Jeremy Grant, Yusuf Nurkic, and then Sharp off the bench, and maybe get a Gafford or somebody, like fill out the bench with some solid bench pieces. I think that team could make a lot of noise because I think it would be good on both sides of the floor. But if there isn't a trade available for 3, my dream would be, I guess, taking Scoot at 3 if he's there because he's best available. But if Scoot goes number 2 to Charlotte, my dream would actually be taking him and Thompson at 3 and then trading for OG Anunoby somehow without giving up too much. Maybe straight up Ant for OG. I think that's a little rich for the Blazers, so it's not really a dream, but I think that lineup could make some sense and be better defensively and would have more future upside with Amen Thompson and Shaedon Sharp. So it's kind of hard to dream right now. I mean, the biggest dreams at the start of the offseason were Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and we've slowly kind of whittled our way down to Jalen Brown, and who knows if that's even going to happen. I was more confident in Jalen Brown happening a few weeks ago, but it seems like there's conflict of interest in what the front office wants to do and ownership wants to do, and it kind of conflicts with what Dame wants, so who knows? I have no clue, and I don't even know what the dream offseason would be at this point. But if the Blazers are trying to win next year, I really want Bruce Brown in free agency. For the full mid-level exception, that is kind of the most clear-cut thing for me. Shout out to EB Interior, who says, up until 2008, 3 teams won the NBA championship with only 1 future Hall of Famer on the team. What were the teams and what did they have in common? Is this a trivia question? Chat, let me know who the 3 teams were and what they had in common, because I don't know. I know NBA history, but like I can't do NBA history trivia stuff. Aurora Acres says, how much cash could Jody stash if Jody could stash cash fast? That's a tongue twister. I think I kind of messed it up, but that's funny. A lot of cash. She would stash a lot of cash, especially if she could stash it fast, and she loves her cash. So Smoke says, is there a way the Blazers can get Brown without giving up the 3rd pick? At this point, no. Never say never, but it's just very clear-cut. It would be Ant in 3, and Boston has a good enough player in Jalen Brown where they could demand that, and Portland, if they're really trying to please Dame, would have no option in that scenario. If they're willing to anger Dame, Portland could say no. I think that's the package that it comes down to, though, for sure. Ol Jakob says, how many good years do you think Dame has left, as in around 30 points per game? I'm going to say 2 to 3. I think he has 2 to 3 years left of being around a 30-point-per-game score. Blazer for life, I assume that's what the 4L means, says, do you think there's a way to get Mikhail Brown or Siakam without giving up Ant and Sharp? Also, can you shout out my friend Aurora A? He's a huge fan of the channel. Shout out to Aro. Shout out to you. Thank you for the question. And there's just no way to get any of those guys probably without giving up Ant. Siakam is the one guy, hypothetically, that I would say you could maybe trade the 3rd pick for, but running theme is Masai Ujiri is stingy. Will Simmons says, an Orlando Magic reporter thinks the team would be interested in a Nurkic for Wendell Carter Jr. swap and proposed a trade of Nurkic and number 23 and a future first for Wendell Carter Jr. and Gary Harris. How would you feel about a deal like this, and would you like Wendell over Nurkic? Well, my first question is, how do the Blazers open up future first if they're trading 23 and a future first to Orlando, considering they owe a 2024 first to Chicago already, and that's lottery protected for multiple years. That's kind of my first question. My second question is, how does that get the Blazers anywhere? Wendell Carter Jr. is a similar type of defender as Yusuf Nurkic. He's not going to block a lot of shots, not going to be super flashy, but he's going to be in the right position pretty consistently. I mean, he's solidly talented, but 2 first-round picks on top of Nurkic for Wendell Carter Jr. solves nothing for this team, just gets the team nowhere. When we talk about trades with the Portland Trail Blazers and we talk about giving up assets, you got to get something back for those assets, and you got to get something back that helps the team improve its biggest weaknesses. And a lot of people say Jusuf Nurkic is their biggest weakness, but statistically that's not the case. The two biggest weaknesses are they give up the most shots at the rim because they give up the most dribble penetration. They can't contain anything on the perimeter, whether it's in isolation or in a pick and roll. And then they struggle rebounding the ball, and that's because of the bigs they have off the bench and Jeremy Grant and basically everyone else on the team except for Jusuf Nurkic. Jusuf Nurkic is the only good rebounder for his position, and Wendell Carter Jr. I think is a little bit worse of a rebounder, so he just doesn't solve anything. It just doesn't get this team anywhere. It could be a play for the future, I guess, if the Blazers rebuilt, but if you're making a play for the future, I think it makes more sense to just keep those picks. So I don't see Wendell Carter Jr. being in the Blazers' plans this offseason. Pineapple says, how many of our first-round picks is the number 3 pick worth? He says, if the Celtics don't necessarily need to draft a player this year, why wouldn't they also accept 3 or 4 of our future first-round picks in the future, assuming we trade back for our pick from Chicago? The number 3 pick is worth like 6 first-round picks. Like, it's kind of hard to tell, but the 11th pick in last year's draft, which ended up being Ousmane Dieng, got traded for 3 future firsts, which, you know, sounds kind of wild, but if you're talking about Scoot Henderson being there at 3, and he would probably have gone number 1 in last year's draft, then you're talking about a ton of firsts, like more firsts than the Blazers have. So that's why it'd be Ant in 3 or nothing else in a Jalen Brown trade scenario. Alfred Gamino for 3 says, what free agents should the Blazers go after, if any? I've already teased Bruce Brown, but I will have videos after the draft before free agency covering that. Clearly a bot says, isn't Dame asking for the pick to be traded, similar to LA leaving him free agency and not letting an up-and-coming star rise? Well, LA was younger when he had Dame, and Dame was already proving that he was really, really good at the NBA level. Dame is 32 now. It's not similar to LA, because LA didn't really put up with incompetency from the front office, where Dame has put up with a ton of it. With LA, it wasn't a situation where, like, the team wasn't willing to go for it, it seemed like. And with Dame, that's the feeling that's been there. So there's differences in those two guys' situations. And then Dame just keeps it real, where LA was a little bit shady with how he handled things and handled his exit leaving Portland. So they're just two completely different guys, and these are two different scenarios. Chukovic says, if Scoot falls to number 3, is there a deal with Houston where they give up number 4 and Jabari Smith Jr. for the rights to pair Scoot with Green? That would be a fun trade for Blazer fans. I don't think Houston would be willing to do that unless they really, really, really loved Scoot. Jabari Smith started looking really good at the end of last season. You're talking about trading the number 3 pick in the draft last year and the number 4 pick in the draft this year for the number 3 pick in the draft this year. Just doesn't seem like it makes sense value-wise. So I think you'd be looking at more of a package of number 4, number 20, Tari Eason. Maybe you could squeeze out an extra future first if Houston is willing to overpay, but I don't think you'd be able to get Jabari Smith in such a trade. Rose City USA says, would there be a way to draft both Thompson Twins without decapitating the Blazers? I know this is a wild one, but them to feed off each other on the court. Your guys' thoughts? It would be really hard to do so. The way you could do so, I guess, is by doing such a trade down with Houston, where you trade down from 3 to 4 so they get Scoot and you get extra assets, and then somehow you parlay those assets into a pick in the lottery and take Asar. I don't know where he's going to go. It could be anywhere from like 5 to 11 or 12 if he really falls. So if the Blazers were able to pick up assets by trading down for Amen Thompson, maybe you could parlay those into Asar Thompson as well. Or the other clear-cut scenario would be trading Anthony Simons for a lottery pick to take Asar. But at that point, you're really going the young route, and you're really going the risky route as well. And I don't think Dame would be happy with not only using a top 3 or 4 pick on a 19-year-old, but then trading Anthony Simons for another 19-year-old. Umar says, how do I cope with being a Blazers fan? By watching Blazers Uprise content. Alex Colfer says, I know you refuse, but just to appease some people, give us the top Dame trades you consider if the Blazers do the unthinkable and Cronin ruins our lives. I'm still not going to do Dame trades. Appreciate your question, but I am not going to go down that route. King Capo 24 says, can someone take Nurk off our hands? We should focus on improving the team, not making the team worse for nothing. Mark Hakes says, trade 23 and 43 and Keon/Knox to the Nets for 21 and 22 and draft Clowney and Lively. The Nets are not doing that trade. That would basically be a second-round pick plus a player that has no value for a first-round pick. Just doesn't make sense for the Nets. And then Aurora A says, if you could trade Nurkic, Little, and 2 future firsts to get Claxton and Finney-Smith from the Nets, would you make that trade? I would absolutely make that trade. The Nets would not. Because I think Finney-Smith is worth a late first, and then Claxton is worth at least 2. So that's 3 firsts right there that you'd have to give up to get them. And I don't even know if those guys are available. So maybe it'd be 4. It's hard to say with the Nets. It seems like they kind of want to keep their roster intact this offseason. The next trade idea is if you were able to trade Anthony Simons, Trendon Watford, and the 3rd pick to get Jalen Brown from the Celtics, then that would be amazing. Yeah, if you could get Jalen Brown and Nick Claxton and Finney-Smith and still have Sharp, yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely. I would love to get Nick Claxton. I'd love to upgrade Jusuf Nurkic to get Nick Claxton. This is where I differ from other people who are just all about getting rid of Jusuf Nurkic. I'm down to improve him for a player that makes sense, but a lot of the players that people think are improvements don't make sense for one reason or another. Ayton makes too much. Turner doesn't rebound. Pairing him next to Grant would be a disaster. Like, Capella isn't an upgrade. Vucevic is a free agent. Like, a lot of the names that I've seen tossed out there don't make sense. But Claxton makes a ton of sense. It would be fun to get him on this team, especially if you got Jalen Brown, because then I think that defense is looking truly legitimate next year, and the offense will be taken care of because you got Dame, you got Grant, you got Jalen Brown. So if the Blazers do trade for Jalen Brown, it'll be interesting to see what the follow-up move is, because the team still needs a follow-up move, and that's where the work really starts for Cronin, building a good bench and kind of building out the depth while also still trying to continue to improve the defense. So there's a number of different ways that the Blazers could go with that. Anyway, thank you all for your questions. I appreciate them. I'll have another video tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. With that being said, I'm out of here. Until next time, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.